So Baruk is presenting his PGR9, which is, for those who are not familiar with the AUT PhD process, is sort of the first year-ish transition from provisional to fully registered PhD candidate. It's basically the major milestone. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Ricardo Sosa, his primary supervisor, lecturer here with me in the School of Future Environments in Creative Technologies, and secondary supervisor, Dr. Fiona Hurd, head of department. Here comes the mouthful of international business strategy and entrepreneurship at AUT. And I would also like to welcome Stanley Freelick and Smita Singh, the two reviewers. I'm not sure if we don't say examiners, but sort of similar thing. So welcome everybody. And without further ado, I would actually say the first thing is the presentation by the student. Then we'll have some time where everybody can ask questions, sort of so more informal. Even the examiners can ask questions, but mostly it's open for the general audience. And then at some point, let's say maximum 30 minutes, I would invite all the non-examination related people to leave the conversation. And then we'll have the time where the examiners ask specific questions. And then I also need to kick Baruk out. And then the examiners will reach their verdict. And then I hopefully can invite Baruk back in and communicate the verdict. If there are any questions, let me know. If you want to chat your questions in the meantime, that's, I think, okay. If it's not distracting to you, Baruk, I'm happy however that works. Or we just hold off until the presentation has finished and then open the barrage of questions. So I think that's it. And I open the stage for Baruk for his presentation. Here you go.
Thank you, Stefan. And thank you for being slightly nervous, because I definitely am. And it's nice when somebody else is nervous as well, I think. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Baruk Jacob tōku ingoa, ko tangata tiriti ahau no inia ahau, e mahi ana ahau the Auckland Co-Design Lab mo the CX Collective. A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Baruk Jacob, and I'm tangata tiriti from India and have been here since 2009. I work with the Auckland Co-Design Lab and the CX Collective. I'll be talking a bit more about that as we go. And just to start sharing my screen. Cool. So this is the title of the research I'm proposing: Emotional Capability in Organizational Innovation Contexts, a Relational Approach. This is a research proposal. Just to be quite clear, this is not research I have completed. It's the result of a few months of work building and clarifying with my supervisors what I would like to research. It's particularly good to see so many friendly faces here today, though most of you make me nervous. But also thank you to the reviewers, thank you to my supervisors, but also thank you to my advisory group who I see are starting to log in. Thank you for your support. Also thank you to other students in the group. It's really good to see you all here, thank you. So to start at the very end, actually, this is the research question that I've finally come to. I'm asking, how can people in organizations shape their emotion concepts and organizational conditions to build healthy and meaningful relationships with each other and their innovation work? And I'll go into a bit more detail in this, but again, before I go there, a little bit about who I am. I am from India. My parents, I whakapapa to two parts of India. My dad's from the southern corner of the country, from the Kumanad family in Kerala state. And my mother's from the northeastern region, from the Mar tribe of Mizoram. I grew up across the northeast and sort of think of that as being where I'm from. And that is actually quite relevant to the research I'm undertaking, because this is Zomia. So while Mizoram, the northeast region generally, is part of the modern state of India, the northeast region is culturally and geographically more connected to Southeast Asia and Western China. This is a map of Zomia. It's also known as the Southeast Asian Massif. This area is characterized by being in the highlands, away from the ancient states and mainstream kingdoms of Asia, whether that's in Southeast Asia, India, or in China. While super diverse in the cultures that live here, there are quite a few similarities in are strategies to avoid being ruled, actually. And that's been quite well documented in Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed. My wife and I moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2009. And we were inspired partly by my interest in Māori culture and her admiration of the nuclear-free movement that told the largest empire in the world to pretty much bugger off. As you can imagine, neither of us are very good at being obedient. We now live in Oroamo Beach Haven, and with my wife Dee and my dog Koda. He looks like a hyena, sounds like a pig, and is pretty much 100% chicken. He is a good boy though. I also work, so I currently work with the Auckland Co-Design Lab and the CX Collective that I've mentioned. And my role is in the space of capability building, particularly around design capability. And my job is to help people design better. And I do that by asking questions, drawing maps, and telling stories. I come to this from a very, very windy path. I started with a degree in English literature, got into computer programming, moved to customer roles that led to training and coaching in the IT and telco industries. When we moved to Aotearoa, I volunteered with horse riding as therapy for kids with intellectual disabilities. This was in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton, and then joined Auckland Libraries. And this was critical because this was where I was introduced to human-centered design and the sheer potential of it. And I've been with the lab for about 2.5 years now, and with the collective for almost 4. And work is literally where this whole story started. So this whole thing started just before the 2019 Rugby World Cup. And I was sitting in a cafe in Papatoetoi, at the Papatoetoi Food Hub with a few colleagues who are quite rugby mad. And while I love rugby, I'm nowhere close to a rugby nerd. And they were talking about the All Blacks who were about to be announced. All Blacks were going to be sent to Japan. And this was about half an hour before they were actually announced. And they were talking about a particular player. And they said he had all the technical skills, his running, his kicking, his hitting other people quite hard. He had all the skills, all the technical skills he needed to perform at that level. He was also great at teamwork. I mean, all the teams that he'd been part of absolutely loved him. But they said they didn't think he would actually make the All Blacks. And when I dug into why, asking them why, they said, well, he didn't know how to unleash the beast, or he wasn't able to release that extra aggression that's needed when you're on the football, on the rugby field, particularly. And about half an hour after that conversation, they announced the All Blacks, and he was not on the team, interestingly enough. And on the train home that night, I started wondering, what was it about the abilities that people need? What is it about the abilities that people need that are not cognitive or attitudinal abilities, but sort of emotional ones, that extra, being able to bring out that extra aggression and that sort of thing. And that is where this whole inquiry started, and all because of the rugby. And I'll go a bit deeper into the inquiry itself, but again, before that, I'll just flip back into my own positionality in this piece of research. So I come to this research deeply, deeply interested in oral cultures. Now, this is linked to both my own identity as Mizo, we are an oral culture, and to the Māori and Pacific heritage of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is also linked to my master's project that explored the idea of post-literacy. So the Gutenberg Parenthesis, which is on the screen at the moment, by Tom Pettit and Lars Sauerberg, sort of explains it this way. They say the invention of the Gutenberg press started a period of mass literacy that has not till then been seen in human civilization. While there was writing, it was confined to the commercial or religious elite. With the invention of the Gutenberg press, it sort of opened the Gutenberg parenthesis, and literacy became much more common and sort of the way we see the world. What is also interesting is with the invention of audiovisual mediums and now with the digital mediums, they say we are entering a period of post-literacy or secondary orality. So while that is not So it's a period of post-literature where the spoken word is again taking primary cultural position. Now, it isn't a return to orality as such. We can't really go back. But our experience of mass literacy means that this is a secondary orality, an orality mediated by our experience of literacy or post-literacy. So I'm deeply interested in secondary orality or post-literacy as a way to look at our emerging world. And so in my research and in my work generally, privilege pre- and post-literate oral cultures in how I approach culture and knowledge. One of the ways my positionality shows is in my approach to research. I'm taking a relational approach, and that says that in the title as well. And what that implies is a relational understanding of both epistemological and ontological questions. I believe that knowledge is created in relationship and can primarily be understood in relationship or through a relationship. So this has three immediate implications for my research. One, I as a researcher will be bringing my whole self to my research conversations, not just my researcher self, so to speak. Number two, reciprocity becomes key. All participants of the conversation, research conversation, should receive value from the research conversation itself. And thirdly, the relationship with the people helping the research is more important than the research itself. So the relationships become key and primary. And reading in this space has taken me right across the indigenous world and worldviews. And some of the most significant ones have been around the Samoan concept of the va, the relational space, where personhood is understood as relational. So your being a person is in relationship with other people. And the exhortation of tiuleva, or keep the relational space tidy, is applied to all aspects of how we live our lives. Worth mentioning, though, is that this understanding of relationality extends to all that exists, not just relationships between or among humans. It's relationships between all things. So a relationship is also necessarily a holistic approach that appreciates and seeks to understand the connections between the various aspects of what it means to be a person and their entire context. So taking from te whare tapawha, taha tinana, taha wairoa, taha whānau, and taha hinangaro. So physical, spiritual, family, and our mental selves. I don't exactly know yet what the implications are for my research from this aspect of relationality, but we'll be watching to understand what emerges. With that framing in mind, I'd like to look at the actual content of this research, which is emotional capability. I started actually with an interest in psychological safety, which is the shared belief held by members of a team that others on the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you for speaking up. It's a psychological safe space. However, there's something about the instrumentality of the idea. Psychological safety is to make better workers. And the top-down sort of leader-led implementation that doesn't quite match the relational base that I'm trying to work from. I also looked at the area of psychological skills training. This is geared towards high performance in sports, particularly, but also it's increasingly used in corporate scenarios. There's a certain fixedness though, about the psychological skills, about what they are and how to build them. And there isn't very much freedom, or doesn't appear to be very much freedom for people to discover the skills they need and then to create them. And that's where I discovered the term emotional capability. The term itself has some mention in the literature. So Rius and Liu define emotional capability as the ability to recognize and regulate the emotions of group members. Wolf et al. Describe it as the willingness and ability of groups to respond to emotional challenges, while Hoy talks about it as the organization's ability to respond appropriately to its members' emotions. So these researchers look at emotional capability as a skill that an individual has, but also as something that needs to sit in the wider organization. And my own research will be extending this work. I refer to Lisa Feldman Barrett, who talks about emotions as being socially constructed, rather than being something that exists in us in some sort of predefined state. Emotional capability then becomes the ability to construct appropriate emotional concepts together with other people. I'm also really struck by Amartya Sen's description of capability as being genuine ability, what he calls an opportunity made feasible. So his work also puts capability in the space of the systemic, not just the organizational. So then, this is what I've come to mean when I say emotional capability. It's the ability of groups of people to develop and manage the emotion concepts and the organizational conditions they need to build healthy and meaningful relationships with each other and their work. So particularly, there's a lot of room in that exploration, but particularly because it's a PhD and we do need to get somewhere at some point, I will be narrowing it down to working in innovation context. So working with people who are looking at or working within the context of innovation. And this is the area that I'm most interested in building and testing these ideas. And of course, what do I mean by organizational innovation context? Now, in his book on understanding complexity, Scott Page contrasts the predictable, if difficult work, of working in simple and complicated contexts with the unpredictability of complexity. Now, he calls this a dancing landscape. Here in the South Pacific, would probably more likely call this the ocean. It's constantly shifting and changing in response to many, many different energies. Organizations now are often in this context of unpredictability and change. Some of it from outside, I mean, think of COVID-19. Some of it from inside the organization, such as the next restructure or the 17th one. So with this in mind, I'm taking organizational innovation context to mean contexts where teams are tasked with responding to or initiating change. Or to sort of put it in the metaphor, teams that are trying to understand how to navigate the dancing landscape. And so to come back to my research question, which is where I started with, and I hope it's a bit clearer where I'm trying to go with this. So I'm looking at how can people in organizations shape their emotion concepts and their organizational conditions to build healthy and meaningful relationships with each other and their innovation work. And to do this, I'm applying project-grounded research, which is a designerly methodology, where theory emerges inductively from the personal and collective experience of the applied project. So you do the project and the theory emerges from the project. And there are characteristics to project-grounded research. And I'll just run over these. So the first is it being human-centered. So I'll be co-designing with research participants who are also in the community that I wish to serve. And I'll be working with them by building their emotional capability. It needs to be solution-focused. So using quick and dirty prototypes towards a long-term goal of building emotional capability. It is speculation-driven. So we're co-imagining alternative futures to navigate the complexity of this research and for our organizations. And of course, the relationships that underpin it. And finally, it's experience-oriented. So research conversations based on making together, learning about emotional capability by actually making it happen. To do this, I'm using 3 research methods, and I'll run through these. The first is conversation as method. Now, conversations share the structure of interviews, but are different in that, and here I quote Feldman, work on a cooperative principle, have a non-directive directionality, result in new meaning, and are not closely structured by time. And what this actually means in practice is that rather than working with research participants, I will be working with co-researchers. We'll be having conversations, not interviews, that create meaning for both of us or all of us in case of a group. We'll also be reflecting and revisiting themes and conversations. So it isn't a one-time experience, but a continuing conversation with multiple instances over time. While the direction of the conversation will be towards building emotional capability, there's no requirement that the conversation only discusses that. There'll be many tangents and side alleys that we may follow as they catch our interest. The second method is noticing as a method, and indigenous relational research methodologies prioritize watching and listening as a way to do research. And these go just beyond just sort of a impersonal observation. It's an involved participatory sort of noticing. And it situates a researcher within the co-researchers community. And I'll be working as closely as possible with co-researchers, immersing myself in their environment as much as is practical. While there will be limitations, of course, and my interactions may only be in workshop-style situations, but I will be paying attention to the relationships and energies between my co-researchers as much as I am to the content of their conversations. The third method is making as method, and this is also quite rooted in both in indigenous and post-literate methodologies. And one way to make together is through playing games together. And games have been used as research method to make futures. So this research project will use a card game to explore the emotion concepts and organizational conditions with the co-researchers. And what making can also take the form of creating a reflexive narrative. With this in mind, co-researchers will be invited to have reflexive conversations with me as primary researchers. This will help build their own reflexive and empathetic muscles, so to speak, closing the reciprocal loop of research participants, co-researchers gaining value out of this research. And we'll be co-creating artifacts that actually allow us to continue to build this emotional capability. From a data collection perspective, most of it will be in video form. I'm looking at working with 3 teams that work in innovation contexts and invite them to co-create a way to understand their emotional capability. And over an agreed period of time, between 4 to 6 months, we will explore the emotion concepts and organizational conditions the team needs to enable their work. And each of these conversations start from the current felt emotion concepts of the co-researchers and move toward desired emotion concepts. Conversation then moves to the organizational conditions needed to maintain these desired emotion concepts. So, to be quite clear, this is not therapy. This is not personal therapy or group therapy. It's about creating shared emotional concepts in teams. And it's for the teams to work it for themselves, and we'll be working together in figuring that out. So working with the team to an agreed rhythm will reflect on the team's experience. And I've said between 4 to 6 months, because there is also what teams need and how much work do we need to do before teams are ready to go off on their own and I can move on to the next team. Co-researchers will be invited, and it's clearly an invitation to video record these reflection sessions to collect data for thematic coding and to create final artifacts that can, with their permission, of course, be shared. However, should co-researchers desire, we can also record only for coding, not for sharing, or even avoid recording altogether. Additional video will be recorded of my own reflections through the process of guiding these conversations. So I'm thinking to split the project into 3 stages and following the sort of the iterative principles that underpin project grounded research. And the first stage is with the team at the Southern Initiative. So I work with the Auckland Co-Design Lab, which is the same unit as the Southern Initiative, and it's at the moment part of Auckland Council. And so in stage 1, I'm looking at collaborating with the social entrepreneur team that's part of the Community and Social Innovation Unit at Auckland Council, and to create emotional capability for themselves. So looking both at the individual emotional concepts and the organizational conditions. Now, my employment is in the same unit, but in a different team. And while I have an existing relationship with the social entrepreneurs, I'm not directly involved in any projects with this team. So this does raise ethical challenges that I'm sure you will notice. I will be leaning into this responsibility following an approach that Bell and Ray Bliss suggest, so that values connectedness over box ticking and being transparent with the team, particularly around data collection, voluntary participation, and informed consent. For stage 2 and 3, we'll be moving after stage 1 and basically inviting a second team to start a similar series of sessions. And this will hopefully be a team that works in the context of commercial innovation, the first one being a team that works in social innovation. Each team will still go through the process of sort of need finding, sense making, prototyping, and synthesizing that human-centered design does. But in the diagram here, I've simplified it as sort of a converse and reflect loop. After stage 2, a third team will be invited to join the research conversations with lessons from stage 1 and stage 2 applied as we go. As you can imagine, there are a few ethical complexities around this. And I've kind of used the partnership, the 3 Ps, the partnership, participation, protection principles to inform how I approach the ethical questions. So from a partnership perspective, this project is deeply rooted in partnership. I'm partnering with industry, both in social and commercial contexts. I also have an advisory group, some of whom are here on the call today, who are practitioners themselves and deeply involved in various aspects of design in the community. From a participation context, this project is deeply participatory at heart. And we're looking at co-creating emotional capability with teams in innovation contexts. And I am absolutely committed to making this as useful to my co-researchers as possible. And while they may not be getting PhDs from this work, apparently university can only give us 1 PhD, I do hope to make a real difference in the quality of their work lives. From a protection perspective, working in the space of emotion can make people really quite vulnerable, especially to the power dynamics of their teams and their organizations. To mitigate this, I'll need to maintain quite clear, transparent lines of communication and be willing to respond to changing needs of my co-researchers and sort of constantly working to check and recheck for informed consent and voluntary participation. This is a rough timeline. I'm hoping to start the first stage in Feb 2022, analysis and stage 2 in June 2022, so doing analysis after each stage, and stage 3 in March 2023, and hopefully submission in November/December 2023. I had quite a think about what research contribution should be. And yes, this is towards a PhD. But again, like I said, this needs to be meaningful for everybody who's involved, meaningful to everybody who's involved in it. And there are 3 principles that I'll be holding my research contributions to. First, I expect that these days will be practical and practice-oriented research contributions, helping to improve the working lives of people in organizations. Second, while I will be getting a PhD from this, hopefully, co-researchers should also get real and deep value from actually working on this project. And thirdly, I'm really hoping that we will co-create heuristics, not frameworks. So heuristics are mental tools that we use to navigate a shifting and complex world. Frameworks tend to get dated quite quickly, in a situation of constant change at least. And they're also an artifact of literacy. And I'm really wanting to create post-literate artifacts. This is not to say that these artifacts need to be vague or lacking in concreteness. And a couple of examples of pre-literate artifacts coming up. And this is the first one. And this is an example of a pre-literate artifact, a navigational chart from the Marshall Islands. These charts represent major ocean swell patterns and the way the islands disrupted those patterns. Now, they're made of sticks and shells and then memorized without the continuing need to be referred to during navigation. Another example of a pre-literate artifact is the Aruruwau, described here by Jeff Evans in his book, Polynesian Navigation and the Discovery of New Zealand. And Aruruwau, it says, in this ancient system from the Caroline Islands, navigational information is passed between sailors via a simple story. These stories are often told and retold by non-navigators purely for their beauty, and the uninitiated usually have no knowledge of the important information contained within. Thus, the story itself becomes a navigational aid and becomes a heuristic to help people find their way. So what I'm hoping is that we will co-create artifacts that refer these kind of pre-literate artifacts of navigation. And finally, of course, this is a journey in gaining perspective. And as this old Mizo chant puts it, Katatangen kikilam. Kitatangen heihilam. From up here, from here, up there can be seen. From up there, this here can be seen. And I do hope that by the end of the journey, I will have better perspective, and that people I travel with will have better perspective too. Thank you very much for your time and energy here today. I'll just open it up to questions now. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you very much, Baruk. This was great, awesome within the time frame. So I didn't even have to worry about that. So now we're entering the stage where we have roughly 30 minutes where everybody can ask questions. So if you want to either chat them in or unmute yourself or raise your hand, unmute yourself. So Simon, for example, you've got your hand up if you want to ask
Hello,
a question.
Simon.
Oh, wait.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very engaging, very well delivered, and it's a very interesting area that you're looking at. I'm from the department of the long mouthful name, IBSI, and I work sometimes in the areas of innovation strategy and also in the kind of networks around innovation and strategy. So
amazing.
For me, the terms relational are concepts very well known for people like John Dunning in International Business Networks, relational assets, relational capability, and any business researcher seeing the terms relational and innovation are going to expect a very precise set of understandings of the economic relationships that you may or may not be exploring. So I would be very careful in the title to think about the use of relational. It strikes me that actually what you're really focusing on is emotional capability rather than relational in your kind of key focus. So in your title, I would probably look at that. And in your literature review, I would acknowledge that you're looking at one aspect of relational, and in other domains and disciplines related to business, that's also got other meanings, especially around innovation. The other term in your title that interests me is innovation. And I don't see any aspect of what I would from innovation studies understand as innovation in your study. What I see you talking about is change, and change from two perspectives. One, internal, so change of organizations, you gave some examples, so drivers of internal organizational change. Two, external change, i.e. turbulent environments. So I think that's really what you're looking at. I think rather than innovation context, which from my perspective, and again, you might clarify the domains you're looking from, my perspective of innovation is the process of commercializing new ideas. That is really innovation, is around bringing new products to market from this perspective, from a business context. So I think really you're looking at the internal and mostly external drivers of change. So the third observation I've got is that you have an interest in heuristics, which is great. And I can see some really good, interesting things coming out of your study. But my suggestion is to consider a title and research questions which reflect more the idea of that you're exploring emotional capability and heuristics in turbulent change environments, because that's what I heard you're doing. And I found the title, from my perspective, would be very misleading. I would expect very different things. So obviously this is a domain thing. This is what academics do. They've got their little territories and stuff. And so I just don't want you to trip over those demarked lines. I can see I've got some colleagues from my department and of course my own head of department as your co-supervisor. So again, they might have very different ways of passing the information I've told you. But I'd just like to wish you well in your study, and you know, as a potential examiner, you know, those things would spring totally into my head if I saw those kind of keywords. Okay, so I'm happy to respond to any questions or to have you respond, or just to leave that with you for now, because it's more of a series of comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the Simon. That's really, really useful. I will have to, I don't have a response top off, to be quite honest. And I will have to think about that. I think those are really interesting challenges, particularly given the area of organizations that I'm wanting to work with. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that. I'm glad this is being recorded because I couldn't take notes quite fast enough. But
I'm
thank you
happy
very
to
much for
send
that.
any suggestions through or to pass them to Smita or Fiona.
I'd be very grateful if you would,
well.
Simon. Thank you very much.
And again, just to make clear, I don't have any problem with the methodology or the content.
Oh, yep.
It's just obviously some of the labeling of the domain.
No, thank you. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant challenge. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Theoretically, your supervisors are also taking notes, I hope. Okay, any other questions? It's a good one.
I had just a comment to make. Congratulations, Baruk. That was such a cool presentation. I'm wondering, I just read a book called The Infinite Game by Nikki Hare, and she runs workshops and things related to it in Tamaki Makaurau. So it might be interesting for you, but a lot of her thing is kind of, it's about like the role of competitiveness, I guess, in society, or and about what our motivation is for kind of infinite games, which is like how we live well together and how we kind of progress society and our own lives as well as the lives of everybody around us. And then the finite games, which are maybe more about kind of short-term return, and yeah, maybe a little bit more kind of tied to like capitalist motivation. And so I wonder if that kind of, because I know you talked about how the ideas for this kind of came from this like game origin, and then you're going to use games as a methodology. So I wonder, I'm just curious about how you might think about kind of the role of competitiveness in there. And one of the things that Hare talks about in her book is the game of beach cricket versus competitive cricket, and how in beach cricket, you know, everybody's kind of working together collegially, even though the game is the same. And so it might just be kind of something interesting to think about in the context of the business environment, about what these kind of long-term motivations are, or the kind of the infinite game within that kind of emotional capability.
Thanks for that, Tessa. You're the second person to suggest the infinite game to me, so I'm going to take that as a very strong tohu, as a very strong sign that I need to read that next. I haven't really thought about it in the competitive sense, to be honest. It's when I'm thinking about games, it's more about the act of play and playing together with these cards that can therefore make emotional capabilities. And sort of, I've been using a particular set of cards called the Emotional Culture Deck. Some of you might be familiar with at work, in a work context, not so much in the research context. And I was hoping to continue something similar, something like that. This is really interesting also from the perspective of what can people be cooperative and work together in a general context, I suppose, that is quite competitive, particularly in a corporate sense. So again, as to Simon's comment, thank you. I don't have an immediate response, to be quite honest, but thank you for that. I might give that some thought, and I definitely will now read the Infinite Game. See a second person tell me to do that.
That's good. Thanks for that question. Anybody else? If not, I have some questions noted down, if I may. May the chair ask questions?
Yeah, sorry, Stefan. I think Luella. I just saw Luella Linaker raised.
Okay. Yep.
Lu, you're right.
I just put my window over the icon. Sorry. Yeah, Luella, please.
That's okay. Thank you, Baruk. That was really interesting, and I'm excited for what it might lead to. I just wanted to respond to Simon, because I think if we, from an Indigenous perspective, a lot of things are innovative, and I don't want it to be captured just in the capitalist business corporate sense. I think we need to expand that wider, because a whole lot of groups take that and buy into that, and they understand it in that way. So I don't want that to be lost, and neither do I want relational to be narrowed down to that as well, because from an Indigenous perspective, everything's relational. You talked about Māori and whakapapa, whare tapawha, but everything is absolutely interrelated, and it's really important if we are going to enable this to be something that's useful. And I challenge our academics to make your research applicable to people in their everyday lives, then we need to also understand it in the context of relationships from human to human. So I didn't want, and so I appreciate what you said, Simon, and this is in a response to that. It's me thinking in the future, that people understand this research in its broadest context. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Luella. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And you have a really good point there too. In its broadest context, and sort of in what, because there is also with the ethics part of it, this whole partnership aspect that I didn't think about. It occurred to me, I was like, how does this actually help Māori, for instance, sort of in being in, well, I'm not the Crown, but I definitely see myself as being tangata tiriti, as sort of being buying into the treaty itself. So I think you've just raised something that I really, really do need to think about that as well. It's like how, not just how does this benefit me and my co-researchers, but what's the broader, what's the broader benefit, particularly to tangata whenua ne? Kia ora, Lou. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, that's great. It sort of tags along to one question I noted down with has ethics. Have you bothered with the EA1 ethics thing yet?
I have not submitted it
Okay.
yet, but I've been preparing.
Okay.
Yes.
Because that's where you have these questions about the charity
Yes.
and
Yes.
what
very much
benefits are. And I would be interested in when you said in your presentation, it's not going to be therapy.
Yes.
Do you somehow capture that in the EA1 in a way? How do you make sure that's?
Yes, I say pretty much exactly that, in the sense that this is not the purpose of this is not for me to be a therapist for the team in some sort of odd way. It's a way for us to build responses together to our work conditions, so to speak. So it's sort of I suppose it flies really close. And I will admit that it flies dangerously close in some ways, just sort of getting into that space. So I will need to be quite deliberately careful that I don't sort of overstep into that space. Also, this is something I've discussed in quite a lot of detail with my supervisors, and will be doing so with my advisory group. I'm really, really hoping the advisory group keeps me ethical, but not that I plan to be unethical, but sort of to challenge me to actually stick to what I'm saying I'm hoping to do.
It's good if you have people taking care of you there.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan.
Any other questions? We still have like roughly 10, 15 minutes, but I'm also happy to close this part of the PGR9 and okay.
Can I ask a question of the group?
Who do you want to ask?
I mean, the group generally, I think. And but the question of ethics, what I've sort of talked about 3 areas. Are there ethical challenges, or are there things you think I really should be concerned about? So, as you've heard, this research draws from quite a lot of different things. So, Indigenous thought broadly, orality quite specifically. I'm doing quite highly participatory, sort of foot in the muck kind of research. What do you think I should be careful of? Where might I trip up?
I'm happy to take that one if no one else. Oh, sorry, Sarah, did you want to?
All right, Smita, I can wait. You go first.
Okay. Well, first of all, Baruk, that was a very good presentation. So congratulations for that. This was going to be one of the things I was going to say anyways. You are talking about, you said quite a few things. It's not therapy, and I get it, you know, our role as, but at the same time, I feel that there are certain tensions and there are certain knots that need to be teased out. And it's great that you are actually in the stage of writing your ethics application, because you can acknowledge these tensions and maybe reflect on some of the ways you're gonna navigate them, not necessarily find a clean solution to it. Well, you know, you've acknowledged it's not therapy, you've acknowledged its ethical complexities, You've also acknowledged that we are vulnerable when we work in the space of emotions. I just thought of myself, and I thought of everybody else who's in the indigenous who has indigenous roots and have had that have grown up with those stories. You come from India, and I just thought emotional culture deck card game. I know nothing about it, so let me just be upfront about that. To me, it's a card game. It's got emotions written on it and an explanation of what each emotion means. I was thinking that language actually helps us connect and form relationships, and you want to take a relational approach in this research, and language also has a strong link to cultural identity. And so my question or further points for you to reflect on, I'm not expecting any responses from you right now. It's something for you to think about in the context of your research and your ethics application, is that will everyone feel included? Will they feel that they belong while participating in this game? Or will there be another tool where the unintended consequences will be that the participants are going to feel excluded or will become passive victims of hurt? They're going to live the historical intergenerational trauma of loss of culture and language through colonization, and so they will have to shrink their notions and their ideas about emotions and how these are described or understood or spoken about in order to play this game. So is it going to be kind of hollow compliance to the game, a learned coping behavior as a result of living under dominance and superiority and power, i.e. racism for generations? So it's about, we know that research has started acknowledging that there are differences in rules around feeling, what are proper emotions, what is emotional restraint, what is emotional restraint, when is it allowed, in which context, when is it necessary? And then, of course, that indigenous peoples, they bear a lot of emotional injuries around emotions, around use of emotions, and then language. And my suggestion to you is, it's great this is being recorded, so you don't have to note this, that there is, as I was preparing for your PGR9 review, I came across an article that might be useful for you if you haven't come across it already. It's called Emotions in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Reflexive Emotionalization in a Colonized Context by Mary Holmes. And it's in Journal of International Sociology 2021. I feel that you have talked about reflexivity. So I think it is something you will have to, in some form or the other, will have to acknowledge it in your ethics application and also perhaps in your literature. Because, hey, if I was a participant in this game, I'd be like, why the hell should I play by the rules of this game? Who defined emotions in what way? And if this is yet another colonized view of the world, I don't want to participate in it. So I'm just giving you a very pragmatic sort of reaction to that. There are other things, but I'm going to shut up, let others speak, and then when the time starts, I can run through my list.
Cheers. Thank you, Smita. Just to try and respond to part of that, and again, yes, I mean, I really acknowledge that is definitely something I'm going to think a lot more and read a bit more about, particularly as I prepare for ethics. One of the ways I currently use the card deck, and that's all I can offer is how I currently use it, because there will be changes in how I will be using it, is to sort of start with rules on how we use in the games. And like you said, it's literally a bunch of cards with emotion words on them. They're in black and white. The black ones are slightly more positive emotions. White ones are slightly more negative emotions, but with the idea that they aren't good or bad emotions, they're just emotions. What the way we usually set up that at work when I use this is to sort of say there are three rules. Rule number one is the emotional culture deck is only a starting point. So it's a bunch of suggestions for emotions that you could be feeling. This is not an end point. This isn't comprehensive in any way. And a lot of this comes from Lisa Feldman Barrett's sort of the whole idea of socially constructed emotion rather than sort of essentialist emotions. The second rule is that people are able to share as much as or they want to or don't want to. You're welcome to lie about your emotions. You can lie to me about your emotions. There's no problem with that. And the third, so you have complete autonomy over what you're sharing or what you're not sharing. And the third rule is to say, when we are listening to other people's sharing about, when we're playing with the deck, the rest of us, our role is to listen. We are not to fix and actually sort of step into situations where people try, but you should try this. No, that is not tikanga. You're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to fix each other. We are here to listen. We can ask questions that delve deeper, but we cannot ask questions that are leading or trying to fix. So that is one way in practice that I've been trying to respond to some of the things that we've been talking about. But having said that, again, thank you very much for that comment. I look forward to hearing some more. Sarah, you were going to say something.
Thanks, Baruk. Yeah, well done. I joined it slightly later, so my apologies if what I'm talking about you've already covered. And many of the concepts you're introducing, I recognize from our previous conversation. So that was really quite wonderful. One thing that occurs to me, and I'm slightly thinking out loud here with you, is that when you're trying to transpose the concept of emotional capabilities into the commercial context, that the commercial environments aren't always that susceptible to the idea of emotions as valuable, or that in fact building emotional capability has an impact on the lo and behold bottom line. And so I'm wondering if there is benefit and or requirement for you to come up with a set of hypotheses around where the value in this research sits for them, individually, as teams and as organizations, so that they actually commit time and effort to participating in a way that is useful to you. Because the flip side of, I guess, that thinking is that if there's restructure, if there are budget cuts for whatever, the first thing that goes is the thing that hasn't been accounted for, or the thing that cannot be quantified. I also think that it would be interesting to understand if what the understanding of value around emotional capability is with your participants and with the organizations that you're working with. So what value do they attach to that, and how do they articulate that? Which is are then hypotheses that you can prove, disprove, or evolve.
Nice.
So that they're sort of two things that, started coming up as you were sharing.
Yep. Oh no, that's amazing. Thank you, sir. I think that will. Again, I'm sorry, everyone. I don't have a whole lot of answers today. Sort of raising more questions for me, but I think some of what you're referring to, Sarah, sort of will talk to when I'm working, particularly with finding teams that I can work with. These are conversations that will be coming up. And yep, I love the idea of sort of what are my hypotheses of revalue. And so that will help my conversations with organizations with sort of setting up the team that I want to work with. So that's really cool. Thank you very much for that. I might, as with everybody else here, if you've said something, I'm taking that as my invitation to get back in touch with you to hear a bit more. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm mindful of time, so we have the 30 minutes are roughly up. George, I saw you briefly had yourself unmuted before Sarah asked the question. Would you have a brief last question, or?
Yeah, kia ora, whānau. No, it was really just to think, I've been part of Baruk's journey for a wee while here, so I've been part of a couple of the teams that he's have had the pleasure of talking with him, around the use of the emotional deck that's using it. It's interesting to sit here and hear references to the game, or how the type of language, because I've been in it for a while, and it's genuinely made a huge difference to growing that particular muscle for the team and I, and for some of the, I suppose, some of the things that that Baruk talked about, being very careful that it's not a counselling session, you know, those things in a funny way, Baruk, and you probably need to do a reflection. They've never ended up like that for some reason, and maybe because you've sort of set clear boundaries from the beginning, and there's always, you know, that relational element that you talk about, and the psychological safety that's established over time. I think those are some of the groundings that's enabled us to actually do that. The thing that you know, as you go forward with your work, that has, you know, should build some confidence for you that it really has made a difference, as you know, to those who have been part of your journey, have really grown. You know, we've really grown as a team in the last couple of years, simply because of the ability to really hone in on that emotional space, because a lot of our work can be very mechanical. And as you often, you know, allowed us the opportunity just to sit and reflect on some of those really important core elements that's associated with our work, and mainly around, you know, bringing our emotions to that space and be better for it. But I think, yeah, you probably, I think there's a whole lot of reflection on your part, because you've been able to actually, you know, to some of the points that's been made, you've done it, and maybe it's because you've been deep in that relational space. You know, you've really created the foundation for it, that safety, psychological safety has been established. I don't know how you would do that in a commercial setting environment, but I think the social innovation elements of it is you've certainly well and truly grounded in that for all of us to be working or walking with you in this journey. Yeah, thank you, Stefan. It wasn't anything, but I think it was just, I just felt that I needed to share that, because I've been part of this journey with Baruk for a wee while, and for some of those things that are concerned, it hasn't unraveled. You know, we haven't seen it turn into an emotional sort of you know, counseling sessions, but if anything, it's probably because of the clear boundaries that you've set in the very beginning.
Cool. That's actually,
thank you very much, George.
I think this is a really nice closing remark. So thanks for that, George. So yeah, thank you very much for all your participants. So we are now closing for the public part, and I would ask everybody who is not part of the examination and management team here to leave the session. Thank you very much, and maybe a little applause for Baruk for the presentation here, verbally or visibly or iconically. Thank you all very much,
and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.